I'm going to be discussing the discography of one of thrash metal's most iconic bands, Kreator. This is one of the Teutonic thrash bands. They're one of Germany's big four, along with Destruction, Sodom, and Tankard. But for me, they are by far the best out of those four bands. They have been pretty consistent over the years. They do have a bit of a stinky period that we will get to, because we're going to discuss all of the Kreator albums in order here, and we're going to place them in a tier list. So S tier being the best, masterpiece, listen to it, D tier being that album sucks, and then everything in between. So we got a pretty expansive catalog to get through here. They've been around since the early 80s, and they've put out 15 albums. So there's quite a bit of material. This can be a daunting discography to get started on if you're not familiar with this band. So the goal of this video is, if you're new, you can kind of have a starting place to Kreator. And if you love Kreator and you enjoy their music anyways, you can just kind of see what I think and which albums should go where. So let's get into it. So their debut is Endless Pain. This is a different sounding record than all the other Kreator albums, even compared to the other Kreator albums from the early days. I would compare this more to a band like Venom or Celtic Frost. It's got a lot of that like early black metal sound. The production is not the cleanest. That probably adds to it. But it's a very raw and aggressive album, and I like that a lot. I think that they got a little bit better among these other early albums as they kind of found their sound, but this is still great. There's plenty of fantastic songs on here. It's an awesome debut album, and comparing it overall to the rest of Kreator's discography, I would put this one in S tier. I'd say it's not my favorite Kreator album, but it's just too good to not rank it highly. Next up is Pleasure to Kill. And before you even clicked on this video, you knew where Pleasure to Kill was going to be. This album is going in S tier. I'm going to put it above Endless Pain. This is the heaviest Kreator album by far. It is, from the moment you press play on this record to the very last note, it is relentless. They really went just balls to the wall with Pleasure to Kill. For most people, it's their favorite Kreator album. For me, I have another one I prefer that we'll get to much later. But the classic era of Kreator, this is definitely the best. There's a huge improvement in the vocals from Endless Pain to Pleasure to Kill. There's just improvements everywhere. The production sounds a lot better. It's still very raw. It sounds like an album that came out in the early 80s. It's not gonna sound as crystal clean as some of these later Kreator albums, but it works. It fits that sound they're trying to go for really well. It is just a raw, an intense album. This is a thrash metal classic. This is a record that really kind of defined the landscape of thrash at the beginning of the 80s. And for that reason, there is no argument that Pleasure to Kill is an S-tier Kreator album. And honestly, if I'm just making a list of the greatest thrash metal albums ever, it's probably going to go up there too. Now, to follow that up, they released an album called Terrible Certainty. And this record is very similar to Pleasure to Kill, I feel like. It does a lot of the same things. It's not quite as intense, and I don't think it's quite as like consistently great as Pleasure to Kill. The front half of this record is better than the back half of this record. That being said, Terrible Certainty is still fantastic. It is one of Kreator's best albums, so not to be a broken record here, but I'm going to put Terrible Certainty in S tier. I'm going to put it between Endless Pain and Pleasure to Kill. I feel like it's more well put together than Endless Pain is, and the production is definitely much better, but it just doesn't have the raw power that Pleasure to Kill has. Still a fantastic record. And that's a theme that's going to continue with Extreme Aggression. This is the album that broke Kreator out outside of Germany. It's their best-selling album, and for good reason. It is great. Songs like the title track and Betrayer, it's where you start seeing these catchy choruses. It sounds a bit cleaner than the first three. It's still got a pretty muddy production, but again, it's an 80s thrash album. Nobody listens to 80s thrash because they want beautiful production. It's a great record. I don't like it as much as I like the first three Kreator albums, but I'm a bit torn between S and A tier for this one, and even though I don't think it's quite as good as the three that came before it, I still think it's good enough to go in S tier. It's an iconic album, it's their best-selling album, and it has enough great songs on it that S tier fits for Extreme Aggression. Next up, we have Coma of Souls. Now, for a lot of people, this is number one. And Coma of Souls is where we really saw a sound shift. The first four Kreator albums, very raw, very aggressive. And Coma of Souls cleans up the production. It gets a lot more melodic. And it almost sounds like the later, like the 2000s Kreator albums to me, and that's not a bad thing. As you'll see later, I really enjoy the 2000s Kreator albums. It was them. I feel like they were riding off the commercial success of Extreme Aggression, and they were kind of trying to make something a bit more accessible, and that's not a bad thing. This is a great starting place to get into Kreator. It's got some of their most iconic songs on it. This is the record with People the Lie. How could you not love it? That being said, I don't think it comes close to the quality of those first four. It's definitely not as good as Pleasure to Kill or Terrible Certainty, but it's still a fantastic album. And for that reason, I'm going to stick this one in A. So now we get into the 1990s, and this is where Kreator start getting a little funky. A lot of thrash metal bands did this, where they experimented with their sound and they tried different things. You had like Testament, for example. They got really heavy in the 90s and went more towards a death metal style. Metallica, that was Load and Reload, where you had almost this country like twang thing going on. And what Kreator did was they went industrial. And the first album that we really see that happen is Renewal. And I am not a big fan of this era of Kreator. I'm not a huge industrial person to begin with, and I just don't think this sound fits them. And the muddy production on the first few Kreator albums is fine. It adds to the atmosphere, but on these records, and Renewal is a good example of this, it just makes them sound bad. Now, this one isn't completely terrible. I don't know if there's any songs on it that I love, but it's listenable. So for that reason, I'll put it in C, because I feel like there are worse Kreator albums, and one that I would put in that category is the next album, which is Cause for Conflict. And I think this is their weakest album. There really aren't too many redeeming qualities in Cause for Conflict. For me, it's again, they're just going for that industrial sound. It doesn't work. They don't pull it off very well. It sounds like shit. Like the production is just terrible. There aren't any memorable songs on here. Yeah, this is a D tier album for me. This is not a record I ever go back to. They don't play anything off it live. this is like the Diabolus Musica or the Saint Anger of Kreator. It's not a record that I personally would recommend that you go out and listen to. Outcast is next, and this continues that industrial sounding theme. This one sounds a bit better than the previous two, at least. They cleaned up the production a bit, but still, this sound really just isn't my thing. And with a band like Kreator that is so good at thrash metal, it doesn't fit. It feels just out of place. I'd also put this one in D tier. Kreator then changed their sound completely again. And I think Endorama is the hardest of any of their albums to place because it sounds nothing like the rest of their discography. I kind of split Kreator's catalog into a few eras. Like, you have the classic, like, old school thrash albums, you have the industrial period of the 90s, and then you have the more melodic stuff of the 2000s and 2010s. Endorama doesn't fit in any of that. This is more of a gothic album. And I kind of like that, to be honest. It's different, and I feel like if it was under any other band name, it would be more widely recognized. There are some good songs on here. As an overall record, it's not fantastic, but it is much better than the three before it. I think I'm going to put this one in C tier just because it really doesn't fit with the other Kreator albums, but this one's kind of on the line between B and C. It's much better than Renewal. Now, Kreator had a return to form when we got into the 2000s, and Violent Revolution was the first example of this. Violent Revolution, the song, great live. This is where a lot of their songs got kind of repetitive, I find, but you get those super catchy choruses, and you have a lot of those. It's a lot more melodic song structures. I feel like Violent Revolution picks up where Coma of Souls left off. And I like that. I like this album. It's not as good as some of the ones that would follow, and it's not as good as the masterpieces of the 80s. So I'll stick this one in the middle. I'll put this one in B tier, but it's still a great album. And again, Violent Revolution, the song, more than worthy enough of a listen. The next one is Enemy of God. And I'd put this one right next to Violent Revolution. I think these two are very similar. Enemy of God is a bit heavier than Violent Revolution. It's also got some great songs. The title track and Suicide Terrorist are probably the best examples of that. And it's just a fun album. It's got some, like, big riffs. It's just a great time. But it's not an oh my god, wow album. It's a good 2000s thrash record. And but it's enjoyable, but it's not incredibly memorable. Hordes of Chaos is next. I would stick this in the middle of Violent Revolution and Enemy of God. Here we go more on the melodic side, more clean production compared to Violent Revolution and Enemy of God. It sounds a lot better. Hordes of Chaos, the song, phenomenal. That's one of the best Kreator songs out there. I think there are some filler tracks here, so that's why I'd put it in B. Is because it's good, but it's not as good as the ones above it. It is not nearly as much of a masterpiece as Phantom Antichrist. At the beginning of this video, when I was talking about Pleasure to Kill, I mentioned that it is not my favorite Kreator album. My favorite Kreator album is actually 2012's Phantom Antichrist. This is flawless. This is a masterpiece. They took what they started building with records like Violent Revolution and Hordes of Chaos, and they refined that, and they perfected it. And every single song on here is a masterpiece. It is so, the riffs are just crushing, but the melodies are so catchy. There's so many songs on here that get stuck in your head. Phantom Antichrist, Civilization Collapse, Death to the World. It's just so good. This is by far my favorite modern thrash album, and to be honest, it might just be my favorite thrash metal album ever. I know it's an unconventional pick, but for me, if you get one Kreator album to listen to, I think you should make it Phantom Antichrist. It's so good. And Gods of Violence, that followed it up, is also really damn good. This is these last few Kreator albums is like the big redemption period where they weren't just an old school band that still made good music. They were making some of the best music. They still are making some of the best music of their career. And that's rare for a lot of these legacy bands, so I commend them for it. Gods of Violence is probably the most accessible Kreator album, but that's not a bad thing. Again, very melodic songs. They're a little repetitive, but that's not a huge deal because they're catchy. Like Satan is Real is a good example of that. Works so good live. Hail to the Hordes, that's another great song. This record kind of gives me like melodic death metal vibes. Like with the guitar styles. Like it reminds me of a lot of those like Swedish melodeath bands with Millie from Kreator on vocals. It's fantastic, and it really doesn't get enough love. And Hate Uberales, also really damn good. I'm going to put it in A tier as well. I would probably put it over Gods of Violence, to be honest. It's a lot of the same themes. It's very melodic, these big choruses, catchy songs. It's great. I really love this album, and I really love this newer sound that Kreator has going on. So overall, this is a great band. They're probably my favorite thrash band. And as far as quality is concerned, their discography is kind of like U-shaped. The early albums are so good. Like their first 4 records are just fantastic. And then they kind of had a weird period in the 90s where they went industrial and then they went goth. And then they picked up again in the 2000s, released the best album of their career in 2012. So yeah, this band has had a great run so far. I can't wait to see what they do next. They're such a fun time live too. I saw them once last year, and I'd love to go see them again. So that's my Kreator ranking. What's your Kreator ranking? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.